Trainer Podcast, episode 178. What is up, Josh?
Early morning this day.
Early morning. Josh got here at 8:30 a.m.
Yep.
Usually sleeping until at least 9. So.
Pretty close.
Pretty early for me.
Yeah.
So, all right, we're getting right into it because Josh has got shit he's got to do after this, so we got to get it out of the way.
All right.
So, today we're going to continue to piggyback off of the last couple of podcasts we've done. So, basically what we've done over the last, I think now 3 podcasts is we've followed the study that obviously Ivan Balabanov put out. We did 2 episodes on that. Highly recommend you watching it. Basically studying the impacts of using e-collars versus like a force-free approach with things. As we kind of plugged away through that, we got more or less introduced to the life model of dog training, which basically outlines the most current depiction of what force-free dog training looks like. Mm-hmm. That basically led us into the 5 freedoms, which we broke down a little bit last time.
Yeah.
And that led us into then the 5 freedoms turning into the 5 domains. The 5 freedoms basically are, a collection of needs for any given animal or species that was put together to be able to provide the highest quality of life, more or less, right? For animals, I think specifically with cattle and stuff initially, in slaughterhouses and stuff to make sure these animals were living the closest to a stress-free life as possible, right? Or reducing stress as much as possible. And then that got correlated into, again, how do we apply this to dogs, right? How do we make sure we're meeting our dog's needs and make sure that we're providing the biological, safeties, right, or freedoms that they need in order to reduce their stress, increase their quality of life, obviously. And that shifted into the 5 domains, right? So the last thing we did is we pulled up this study. We did not read it because it was long. We said we'd save it for the next one.
Yep. And
the study here is the 2025 domains model, including human-animal interactions and assessments of animal welfare. So what I want to do is, I don't know if this will be the last one or not, but we will get into this study here, discuss it a little bit. And we're kind of going down this rabbit hole together, if you will. A lot of this stuff actually is fairly new to me. I've never been the kind of guy that sat down and really read in detail the studies. I have my Cliff Notes version of all of them that I know. Yeah. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But we're kind of getting into this stuff together and learning together with things. So I don't know exactly all of the details of what this study is going to entail, but we'll read it together and we'll see what we think.
Perfect.
All right. So again, the 2020 5 domains model, including human-animal interactions and assessments of animal welfare. So we'll start off, obviously, we got the simple summary of this. This review outlines the latest in a succession of updates of the 5 domains model, which at each stage incorporated contemporary verified scientific thinking of relevance to animal welfare assessment. The current update includes, within the structure of the model, specific guidance on how to evaluate the negative and or positive impacts of human behavior on animal welfare. Persons whose actions may be evaluated include, but are not limited to, livestock handlers, owners of draught animals, veterinary care staff, pound and shelter staff, zookeepers, wildlife managers, hunters, researchers, companion animal owners, owners of sport or recreational animals, animal trainers and service animal handlers, and that's it. A lot of different types of people we might be talking about.
Very much so.
Situations where human-animal interactions may have negative welfare impacts include when animals have had little or no prior human contact, when human presence adds to already threatening circumstances, when human actions are directly unpleasant, threatening, and or noxious, when humans' prior actions are remembered as being aversive or noxious, and when the actions of bonded humans cause unintended harms. In contrast, situations where human-animal interactions may have positive welfare impacts include when the companionable presence of humans provides company and feeling of safety, when humans provide preferred foods, tactile contacts, and or training reinforcements, When humans participate in enjoyable routine activities or in engaging variable activities, when the presence of familiar humans is calming in threatening circumstances, and when humans act to end periods of deprivation, inhibition, or harm. The explicit delineation within the model of the potential impacts of human interactions on the welfare of animals enhances the model's utility. Additional updates in this latest version are also explained. So that's all a mouthful.
A lot.
Basically, all they're saying is they are going to be studying a variety of different people that interact with a variety of different animals. They will be studying the negative things that could come about between a human and an animal.
Yeah.
And then they gave all their examples of it, a variety of different things you could do that could potentially have be a negative experience to the dog, right? Or all of the things that can be a positive experience to the dog. Now, again, before we even get into this, a lot of these studies, I caveat this with these studies are the studies that are used to try to outlaw the tools that we use.
Yeah.
Right?
Very much so.
Keep in mind, though, I'm sure, because again, people lean on these things, right? There are going to be things in this that sound compelling, right? But it is because they're most likely, and again, I'm making assumptions before we even read it. I will correct myself as we get into it. But many of these are exclusively looking at individual situations without bigger picture context.
Yeah.
Right? So we talked about all the aversive or noxious things, right, in this, right? I'm sure they will be looking at things you do in the moment, like punishing your dog, utilizing a training tool, right? Whatever it may be, as in the moment being a negative experience to the dog, right?
Yeah.
But it will not look at the bigger picture of how is it altering behavior to create more pleasant and positive experiences, which is the end goal, obviously. So just keep that in mind as we read this. All right, here's the abstract. Throughout its 25-year history, the 5 domains model for animal welfare assessment has been regularly updated to include at each stage the latest authenticated developments in animal welfare science thinking. The domains of the most up-to-date model described here are 1, nutrition, 2, physical environment, 3, health, 4, behavioral interactions, and 5, mental state. The first 4 domains focus attention on factors that give rise to specific negative or positive subjective experiences, which contribute to the animal's mental state, as evaluated in domain 5. More specifically, the first 3 domains focus mainly on factors that disturb or disrupt particular features of the body's internal stability. Each disturbed or disrupted feature generates sensory inputs, which are processed by the brain to form specific negative effects. And these effects are associated with behaviors that act to restore the body's internal stability. As each such behavior is essential for the survival of the animal, the effects associated with them are collectively referred to as survival critical effects. In contrast, Domain 4, now named Behavioral Interactions, focuses on evidence of animals consciously seeking specific goals when interacting behaviorally with 1, the environment, 2, other non-human animals, and 3, as a new feature of the model outlined here, humans. So that means that they added in, obviously, animals consciously seeking specific goals when interacting behaviorally with humans. In a nutshell, training.
Yeah.
Right? So they're adding in the training impacts here, obviously, which is getting back to, again, studying how our training impacts our dog's behavior, right? The associated effects evaluated via Domain 5 are mainly generated by brain processing of sensory inputs elicited by external stimuli. The success of animals' behavioral attempts to achieve their chosen goals is reflected in whether the associated effects are negative or positive, collectively referred to as situation-related effects. These outcomes are understood to contribute to animals' perceptions of their external circumstances. These observations reveal a key distinction between the way survival, critical, and situation-related effects influence animals' aligned behaviors. The former mainly reflect compelling motivations to engage in genetically embedded behavioral responses, whereas the latter mainly involve conscious behavioral choices, which are the hallmarks of agency. Finally, numerous examples of human-animal interactions and their attendant effects are described, and the qualitative grading of interaction that generate negative or positive effect is also illustrated. So basically, they are just outlining what they are studying again, right? They are outlining what the domains are, and they are clarifying the updates to the domains they did. Now, an interesting thing before we even get into this, notice the very first domain. Again, I always try to find commonalities here. Right?
Yeah.
The very first one, nutrition, right? And third, health. These will kind of tie in together. One of the hardest conversations we could have with our dog owners is when their dogs are fat.
Yeah.
It is. I will tell you, in all of my years of working with dogs and dog owners, some of the hardest and some of the most, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, right? The most tense conversations I've had and the situations where clients have gotten the most frustrated with me before have all been surrounding their dogs being too fat and them needing to make adjustments to their dog's feeding schedule, right?
Oh, yeah.
The reason why I bring this up is because obviously they're putting nutrition as domain number one, right? And all of these domains the reason why they created these domains is because they all impact, as they said, the dog's behavior, right?
Yep.
So you cannot deny when your dog is on a horrible diet. And I'm not even talking about, I am empathetic to feeding like low quality kibble, right? Like I understand, like, human food prices are fucking crazy expensive.
So is
dog food is so expensive, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I'm not even talking about that, right? I am talking about the dog eating way too much and then eating way too much because you are the one controlling how much they're eating, right? And I used to talk all the time, like, I know for me, like, I've been through ups and downs as far as eating like shit and eating healthy and how my mood and my behavior and stuff is impacted based on like where I'm at in my current diet cycle, right? And in my peak times where I was just eating fast food all the time and just had just eating whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, et cetera, it is undeniable that I was more anxious. I was more irritable. I didn't feel good. Like my behavior was just shit because of it, right? My whole mental well-being and everything was shit because of it.
Yeah.
Right? So one of the most simple things we could do with our dogs and should do with our dogs, past just from a health standpoint of if your dog's fat, you're going to be spending a lot of money on vet bills in the future with your dog, right? Past just that, it is undeniable that if your dog is not on a proper feeding schedule, that is going to impact their behavior.
Yeah.
I really want people to pay attention to this. If you feel like your dog is free feeding, too overweight, whatever it may be, go to our website. We have a blog post entitled Building Food Drive with Your Dog, which I wrote that blog with the intent of teaching people that have dogs that are uninterested in working for positive reinforcement how to get their dog to a place where they're working for positive reinforcement. But that blog also directly will help you get your dog on a more healthy feeding schedule and help to work through these types of things. So I just want to kind of plug that in here because I'm looking for commonalities. A lot of this I'm sure we're going to agree on.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
So keep that in mind. All right, let's get into this.
All right.
So number one, the introduction. The 5 domains model for animal welfare assessment was originally formulated in 1994. It was subsequently updated in 2001, 2004, 2009, 2012, 2015, and 2017, and now 2020.
Yeah. Jeez.
To incorporate current, authenticated developments in animal welfare science thinking. The associated evolution of the model is outlined in detail in Section 2. In general terms, the updates incorporated contemporary knowledge of interactions between physiological mechanisms and the generation of particular subjective experiences known as effects or affective states. They also expanded the range of specific effects to be considered and clarified their biological roles. Initially, the emphasis was on welfare-compromising negative effects, and later welfare-enhancing positive effects. Finally, the methodology for undertaking model-based welfare assessments was refined as the model was increasingly applied internationally to wider ranges of vertebrate species and animal use sectors. The aim of this review is to include within the structure of the model specific guidance on how to evaluate the negative and or positive welfare impacts of human proximity to and or behavior towards animals. Although all published versions of the model have included brief reference to such human impacts, usually they were portrayed simply as being potentially aversive, neutral, or benign. However, during the last 5 to 10 years, increasing attention has been given to conducting much more detailed assessments of such impacts. The persons of interest include livestock handlers, owners of draught animals, veterinary care staff, pound and shelter staff, zookeepers, and wildlife managers, hunters, researchers, companion animal owners, owners of sport and recreational animals, animal trainers, and service dog handlers. Accordingly, the model has been extended to facilitate explicit and detailed assessment of the welfare impacts, and these people may have on the animals in their care or control. The current review begins, as indicated above, with an account of the principal features of the 25-year evolution of the model. The general features of the 2015 model and the methodologies for grading welfare, compromise, and enhancement are then described. The rest of the review focuses on the 2020 model. Details of the first 3 domains, 1 nutrition, 2 physical environment, and 3 health, are outlined, updated, and the features they have in common are identified. We also show how a range of factors in each domain generate specific negative or positive effects that are evaluated via Domain 5, the animal's mental state. Domain 4 and its attendant, Domain 5 effects are then described in detail. Previously called behavior and now behavioral interactions, Domain 4 is subdivided according to the nature of animals' interactions with 1, their environment, 2, other non-human animals, and 3, humans. The last of these is described extensively, including considerations of the grading of negative and positive welfare impacts. Finally, the review ends with concluding comments. So that's all still the introduction.
It's a long intro.
Number 2, the 25-year history of the 5 domains model, responses to changes in animal welfare thinking. Formulation of the model for assessing negative impacts of research, teaching, and testing. The model, originally formulated in 1994, had the specific purpose of prospectively and retrospectively assessing and grading the negative impacts of research, teaching, and testing procedures on sentient animals. Deployment of the model enabled such assessments to be made in much greater detail than before. In 1997, assessments and grading using the model were mandated within the regulations that govern Animal Ethics Committee scrutiny of all proposed and completed RTT activities in New Zealand, a requirement that continues to this day. So basically, this was created to help make testing, researching, and teaching more ethical to animals, and it is something in New Zealand they require to this day still, which is great.
Yeah.
Prior to formulations of the model, RTT impact assessments usually focused very narrowly on the precise details of the particular manipulations to be applied to the animals, leaving largely unexamined the animal's wider circumstances that could cause additional negative impacts. The first 4 of the 5 domains of the model were developed to correct this. Their purpose was to draw attention both to interactions among diverse functions within the body and to the negative impact of external factors on those functions, all of which in various combinations have relevance to impact assessments across the 4 physical functional domains. Finally, the 5th domain was designed to capture the overall mental experience of animals, evaluated in terms of the suffering from all impacts considered within the first 4 domains. Hence, the explicit focus of the 1994 model was the detailed and holistic assessment of animal welfare compromise. It also provided a basis for qualitatively grading the severity of the negative impacts. The 5 domains were 1 nutrition, 2 environment, 3 health, 4 behavior, and 5 mental state. The first 3 domains focused attention on internal imbalances or disturbances which had natural or nutritional, environmental, and health origins. In contrast, the focus of the fourth domain was on external restrictive confinement or restraint, or otherwise unusual space availability and or negative impacts of the presence or absence of other animals, including humans. After collation of the objective evidence derived from considerations of factors in the first four domains, the subjective, emotional, or affective experiences cautiously inferred to be associated with these disturbances or restrictions were then assigned to the fifth domain. The fifth domain enables an ultimate assessment of the overall welfare state of the animals, understood in terms of what they were likely to experience subjectively. Notably, the first version of the model restricted these experiences to thirst, hunger, anxiety, fear, pain, and as a catch-all term, distress. So again, they're the first two. These are very important things to look at here, right? Mm-hmm. So they're talking about, obviously, nutrition being all of the things internally that can cause a dog to feel irritable, and then two, environment. So we talked about the nutrition side of things. Now, I'll caveat, I was referring to, I think most commonly in pet dog households, it's dogs that are overweight, right? Yeah. Obviously, when you get into shelters and other situations and stuff, you can obviously have the equal problems with severely underweight or deprived of food.
Malnutrition,
right? Malnutrition obviously can equally cause behavioral issues.
Yes,
right?
Very much so.
So I don't want to act like I'm obviously ignoring that side of things. That obviously is in that same category, right? But environment. So we talked a couple episodes ago about a German Shepherd I was working with that was just a neurotic mess, basically, right? And we had to focus on keeping him under control, obviously. But this dog, when you look at from an environmental standpoint, was a lot of his behavioral issues that the owner was struggling with were caused by environment.
Yeah.
Right. I had an interesting conversation with a client the other day where we were talking about not just him, but other dogs very similar to him that we've worked with in the past.
Okay.
And, I will unfortunately see all the time people that live in these like apartment buildings downtown, right, that have like German Shepherds, right? And you have a dog that has needs of having a lot of space, of being able to run and be free and environmentally be provided, I think they mentioned in here where is it? Hold on. Yeah, external restrictive confinement or restraint, right? Like that German Shepherd, and this, I'm using a hypothetical German Shepherd right now, that German Shepherd living in the apartment building in downtown Cleveland is exclusively put in an external restrictive confinement, right? Yeah. The box of his fucking house, right? Or restraint on a leash 24/7, right? Yep. And maybe if they're lucky, they have a family member that has a large backyard that every once in a blue moon, they can take the dog over there and let the dog go run and be free, right? Yeah. Or maybe this owner invests in off-leash training for the dog, right? And they finally can get to a place where they can go for like off-leash hikes. Yeah. Or they could go to a big field and let the dog run and play or whatever it may be. But it is undeniable that German Shepherd living in that environment, it is contributing to any and all behavioral issues that they're experiencing with them because it is not a natural environment for them to be living in. And it's so hard because, like I have people comment all the time. They're like, when I have the client come in with the German Shepherd that lives in the apartment, I spend all my time convincing them to get rid of the dog. It's just like, it's such a catch-22. So it's like, yes, if that German Shepherd lived with somebody that had 3 acres of land or something, would it be happier? Probably. Yeah. Right? Like, yeah, like with almost 100% certainty, that dog would be happier. Yeah. Right? But it's like, I don't know if you've tried to convince somebody to get rid of their dog that they love, but like you want to talk about starting off on the wrong foot. Yeah, not good. Creating some problems. It's probably not going to work out. No. Right? So it's like, I've always lived by the philosophy of like, even though I haven't been following these domains intentionally, right? The health of the animal is something we always focus on. And then obviously, what was the second one? Is it environment?
Yes.
Yeah, environments, right? Physical and atmospherical challenge, right? That is something we focus on as well, right? Is finding ways to provide a better environment, fixing some of the external issues that are contributing to problems to our clients that we're working with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that one. It's, I mean, yeah, we agree upon that. And, I remember a long time ago, one of the early podcasts that we talked about where it's like, if you take your dog on a walk, the same block every day, that's not really stimulating anything for your dog. It's just the same mundane thing every day.
Sure. Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily fall into like you're breaking one of the domains necessarily.
No.
I mean, that's just like overall like mental stimulation you're providing for them. As long as you're still providing, again, like not too much restraint constantly and adequate space for them.
Sure.
That's not that much of an issue. That impacts more your dog's training, right? And just providing, good outlets for them and stuff. But yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. From the outset, the model was based on the premise that physiological mechanisms, later generalized in the term biological functioning, are the foundation of effective experiences. That effective experiences can influence physiological mechanisms, and that both of these elements interact dynamically within the body, which operates as an integrated whole entity. However, around this time, two competing schools of thought emerged, one emphasizing biological functioning and the other affective state, each of them arguing that the other had significant shortcomings in the ways it assessed animal welfare. Now it is widely recognized that these two elements interact dynamically and that together they provide a more comprehensive foundation upon which to base welfare assessments. Also, the inclusion of Domain 5, mental state, within the model emphasizes that what matters to animals in welfare terms is their subjective experiences. In 1994 model, the 1994 model, therefore, had an effective state orientation, but with the advantage carried forward into all later versions of the model that the dynamically integrated alignment of the physiological mechanisms underlying specific effects provided a more coherent and informative basis for evaluating their welfare significance. So basically what they're saying with all of that is that all animals are a little bit different with their needs, right? It is all subjective experience, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that German Shepherd living in that apartment, it could be absolute torture for them. And that, because of that dog's biological needs, that dog's external factors that are put on them, and their subjective experiences of it as a whole, for that dog, that could be breaking the domain number 2, environment, right? But for another dog that doesn't have those same needs, for another dog that is different in their biological urges, right? That would not be considered the same for them. It would not be considered too restrictive.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. The initial emphasis on negative welfare states. The inception of animal welfare science occurred when the scientific method was first applied to evaluating problems perceived to have welfare significance. For example, those in production, animals exposed to inadequate nutrition, shelter, shade, space, and protection against disease and injury. From the outset, animal welfare science focused on the optimal care of animals' physical, functional states, the aim being to be free of any identified problems. In animal welfare terms, this meant that for about 15 years, virtually all scientific attention was focused on studying negative welfare states and the circumstances that caused animals to have unpleasant or aversive experiences. The impacts of this approach were profound. It resulted in major science-based advances in understanding of animal welfare and its management. Advances which provided the foundations for the subsequent developments in thinking and ways of assessing welfare states, some of which are described below. Giving greater definition to the meaning of distress. As noted above, the fifth model of the 1994 model drew attention to a limited range of specific affective experiences and, as a catch-all term, to distress. This was deliberate because of the inclusion of additional specific effects was thought likely to hinder acceptance of the model at a time when the legitimacy of focusing on affective states had not yet been widely accepted among animal welfare and other animal-based scientists. So distress became a placeholder for other negative effects animals may experience. Use of this term and equally generic references to suffering are still common today in animal welfare legislation. codes of welfare and legally enforceable regulations, and are also included in industry and institutional guidelines. Nevertheless, it was increasingly recognized that such generic terminology can oversimplify the way animal welfare is formally and informally evaluated and regulated. Accordingly, over at least the last 20 years, considerable attention has been given to identifying specific effects that may be included in these terms. Thus, the list expanded, and in addition, 2 major categories of negative effect were identified. The first category, survival critical negative effects, refers to experiences generated by sensory inputs that register imbalances or disruptions to the internal physical functional state of animals. They include breathlessness, thirst, hunger, pain, nausea, dizziness, debility, weakness, and sickness. These effects are designated as survival critical because they are aligned with essential components of genetically embedded mechanisms that elicit or are associated with behaviors on which the survival of animals depends. The undoubted negativity of each effect creates a sense of urgency or a dominating compulsion to engage in behaviors which are specific to that effect and its resolution. Examples of links between effects and responses include breathlessness and respiratory activity, thirst and water seeking, drinking, hunger and food acquisition, pain and escape or avoidance responses to injury, as well as weakness, sickness, and securing benefits from isolation and rest. Importantly, the greater the intensity of the negative effect, the greater the sense of urgency or compulsion to engage in the aligned behavior and vice versa. Once the behavior achieves the required corrective physical functional outcome, the intensity of the negative effect declines, and correspondingly, the motivation to perform the salient behavior subsides. Unpleasant experiences that cannot be effectively relieved through behavioral and physiological responses may have greater detrimental impact on the welfare state than acute but short-lived experiences. The second category, situation-related negative effects, refers to experiences generated by brain processing of sensory inputs that mainly originate from outside of the body and reflect the animal's perception of its external circumstances, its situation. These effects currently include frustration, anger, helplessness, loneliness, boredom, depression, anxiety, fear, panic, and hypervigilance. Also note that the emotional pain of social isolation, i.e. loneliness, is now receiving increasing attention. Animals in impoverished and or threatening situations may experience these effects in various combinations. The distinguishing attributes of each negative effect in these 2 categories have now been described. Identifying the specific conditions that generate this wide range of negative effects and understanding the basis of these 2 categories allows potential negative welfare impacts to be assessed more thoroughly and remedial actions to be focused more precisely than before. It is worth noting that the 2 categories are not mutually exclusive. For example, a tired racehorse that is being whipped may feel pain triggering escape or avoidance responses, and helplessness if those responses do not resolve the situation because the horse cannot escape the jockey, who is the source of the pain. Likewise, the experience of pain may be modulated by awareness of fear-inducing stimuli, such as the presence of predators. So basically, they're outlining now, in all these studies, they're going to go through all their definitions of things, obviously. When it comes to their negative effects, they have the internal and the external, right? Things that are caused by things happening internal to them, right? That are causing, the way to solve those things, the escape or the avoidance of that aversive sensation they're experiencing, or the external ones, obviously, right? And basically, they outline these because the more clearly you have this outline, like these are essentially all of the reasons why an animal, right? And we're using this to describe dogs, obviously, but they're using it for all, right? Almost all behavior, right, can be identified because of a reason, right? Like there's some sort of factor internally or externally that's causing a dog to rehearse certain things, right? In most cases, it is something negative that they are trying to escape or avoid, right? Or, again, as we get into the positive, things that they're trying to access, things that are salient to the dog, I believe they refer to it as, right?
Yep.
So this is good because when we're looking at rehabbing dogs, particularly serious behavioral issues, serious anxiety, serious aggression, right? You are I say it a million times, right? You're always fighting an uphill battle if you can't figure out why the dog is rehearsing it in the first place, right?
For sure.
Now, again, my problem is generally never with these studies as a whole, but their interpretation of these studies, right? So we could look at like, these behaviors are caused by certain things. So we have to solve that thing in order to get the dog to control themselves, right? We just solved the thing, and then why would the dog want to rehearse it anymore, right?
Yeah.
That's where all the other factors come into play with things, right? Of the environment, sometimes you can only make the environment so good, right?
Just true.
Sometimes, I think this is the problem with domesticated animals as a whole, right? Is this idea of domestication is we're making these dogs fit into our world,
right?
Even if it is not totally natural for them. And then genetically over time, they are starting to become more adaptable to the new situations, but they're still fucking animals.
Yeah.
Right? There are some that are not going to fit as perfectly into the boxes we want.
Very true.
But if they are going to be domesticated animals, we still have to have certain control over them regardless of some of the reasons sometimes. So you've got to balance all this out. This is where I always say dog training is science, but dog training is also an art.
Yeah.
Right? Of weighing all of the variables and figuring out the best happy medium we could find at all times.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Moving on. Including consideration of positive affective experiences in the model. From the early 2000s, animal welfare scientists gave increasing attention to positive affective experiences. This was motivated by the recognition that good or acceptable animal welfare, embodied in notions such as a life worth living, cannot be achieved simply by mitigating or avoiding negative experiences, and that some pleasurable experiences are needed as well. Thus, attention increasingly shifted away from the mere care of animals towards their physiological well-being or psychological well-being. The model was therefore revised extensively to include in each of the first four domains the internal and external circumstances that may give rise to positive effects, which, as with the negative effects referred to above, were assigned to the fifth mental domain for consideration. Such experiences, when presented, contribute to welfare enhancements. These revisions were based on the scientifically supported understanding that animals may have pleasurable experiences when their external circumstances include, but are not limited to, the following: variability that provides an optimal balance between predictability, controllability, and novelty, unpredictability, meeting species-specific needs for movement and exercise, access to preferred sites for resting, thermal comfort and elimination behaviors, environmental choices that encourage exploratory and foraging behaviors and durations, availability of a variety of feeds having attractive smells, tastes and textures, and circumstances that enable social species to engage as fully as possible in bonding activities with familiar conspectives, conspecifics? I don't know that word. I don't know if I've ever read that word before. The calming comfort of being in a group of familiar conspecifics, and as a look that word up for me.
Yeah. Well.
CONSPECIFICS. As appropriate or affiliative interactions such as allogrooming, bonding, maternal, paternal, or group care of young, play behavior, and sexual activity. Expressed in general terms, the associated welfare-enhancing effects likely include various forms of comfort, pleasure, interest, attachment, confidence, and a sense of being in control. Did you find it?
How'd you spell it again?
CONSPECIFICS.
A member of the same species.
Got it. So interacting with a member of the same species.
Oh, and it's conspecific.
Conspecific? Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, that's a wild one.
So basically they're outlining all the positive things, right?
Yeah.
So you look at the negative, right? And you think, okay, alleviate the negative issues, right? and things will be just fine.
Yeah.
So they're looking at it on a spectrum, negative, positive. You alleviate the negative things, you get to neutral, right? But if everything is just neutral, is that a life worth living if there's no positive, right? You're kind of just
there.
existing. Right? That is an interesting way to look at it, right?
Yeah, truly.
We don't want our dog to be constantly having negative experiences, obviously, but if they're never having positive experiences,
yeah, just sitting there.
They're just literally existing.
Ugh.
Right? So they're looking at then, the opposite of all of the negative things, basically.
Yeah.
Trying to strive for that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Moving on. Applying the model to numerous species of sentient animals evaluated for diverse purposes. Within the mandatory New Zealand regulatory context, the model in its various updated versions has been used to assess the negative welfare impacts of RTT procedures applied to a wide range of sentient animals being evaluated for diverse purposes. As noted previously, the animals have included horses, cattle, deer, goats, sheep, pigs, poultry, game birds, and other birds, including endemic, native, and introduced species: dogs, cats, guinea pigs, mice, rats, rabbits, ferrets, stoats, weasels, kangaroos, wallabies, possums, cetaceans, reptiles, amphibians, and fish.
Okay.
The study's purpose have included fundamental and applied biomedical, veterinary, agriculture, ecological welfare, educational, and other approved investigations. Expanding application of the model beyond the research testing and testing context. In addition to these RTT purposes, the model has also been used to prospectively and or retrospectively assess negative and or positive welfare impacts of proposed new or modified approaches to housing, managing, and or interacting with farm, working, livestock guarding, sport, zoo, wild, free roaming, introduced, and other terrestrial animals, as well as cetaceans. The model has also been forensically in Canadian court cases to assess suffering and animal cruelty. Given the diversity of animals and model application, there's merit in assembling scientifically informed experts who collectively can provide detailed input on species-specific biology, ethology, ecology, physiology, pathophysiology, health and management, and also effect-related, neuroscience-supported behavioral expertise and experience with the operation of the model. Using widely experienced panels or consultative networks is helpful in such evaluations. Basically, they're showing all the areas where these domains have been used.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on here. Looks like, okay. I think we're making some headway in this.
Yeah.
Let's see where we're at. Plugging away. Look at that. 42 minutes in.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're finally going to get into, this is the 2015 5 domains model.
Okay.
So full descriptions of the 2015 model, including details of how it operates and its key applications to the assessment and management of animal welfare, have been published elsewhere. It is strongly recommended that readers consult these sources after pursuing the brief outline provided below. So this is the general features of the model. The model is not intended to define good and bad welfare, nor is it intended to accurately depict body structure and function. Rather, it is a device for facilitating systematic, structured, thorough, and coherent assessments of animal welfare, and for qualitatively grading welfare compromise and enhancement. The purpose of each domain is to draw attention to areas that are relevant to welfare assessments, taking into consideration the understanding of animal welfare briefly outlined above and presented in more detail elsewhere. In view of the dynamic interactivity of virtually all mechanisms in the body, there's inevitably considerable interaction among the specific body functions or states. The impacts of external circumstances and related affective experiences identified via the model. Accordingly, factors considered within different domains may overlap. For example, a painful event may be identified in domains 2 and 3. However, when conducting a model-based welfare assessment, the particular origin of the specific effect needs to be considered only once, so that it should be arbitrarily assigned to a single domain. This avoids concerns about duplication that may lead to overweighting of a particular experience in the final interpretation. And it also avoids fruitless arguments about domain specificity. So basically, my interpretation of what they just said right there is look at an individual effect, right? Assess which domain that it falls within, but don't weigh it too heavily independently on the end, the 5, right, of the welfare of the animal ultimately, right? So actually, if I'm interpreting that correctly, we could use that example for training techniques, right? My dog jumped on, the counter to try to steal something, and I gave them a correction for it. It was a painful event, obviously. That would fall within an external thing happening to them, so that would be the second domain, I believe, right? And, you want to keep it in mind, obviously, but you can't weigh that too heavily on the end without assessing everything else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
They're heavily encouraging looking at things as a whole as opposed to an individual event.
Yeah.
The 2015 model, in common with the 1994, 2001, 2004, and 2009 versions, is generic rather than species-specific. The primary purpose of the domains is to provide examples of some internal states or external circumstances that animals may encounter and the aligned negative and positive effects that may arise in many species. However, as particular effects generated by sensory modalities that are beyond direct human experience are not known, the details provided are neither definitive nor exhaustive. Examples include unique modalities such as echolocation, ultrasonic communication, infrared sensory abilities, electromagnetic field detection, highly adapted chemical and vibrational sensitivity, as well as the exaggerated or diminished acuity of the common modalities of vision, audition, and olfaction across different taxa, and also the effective experience of flight in birds, bats, and gliders. Moreover, essential information about some effects and their generation is very limited or non-existent in less well-studied animals, such as in many zoo or free-living wildlife species. For example, it is not clear whether cartilaginous fish experience some kinds of pain because of the failure, as yet, to identify the necessary sensory receptors. Accordingly, each example should be assessed by reference of what is known about the animal's species-specific behavior, physiology, and ecology, considered in relation to its particular physical, biological, and social environment. The summary diagrams of the 2015 model, all features of which have been included in the updated 2020 versions presented in sections 4 and 5, have the status of guiding Addis memoir. Therefore, when applying the model to new species or contexts, the examples provided should be considered carefully and only after sufficient justification be retained, deleted, or amended, and or others added as deemed appropriate for each species. In a nutshell, what they are saying with all of that is every individual species has different sensory modalities, right? Mm-hmm. They feel pain differently. They have different needs, right? Every animal is different, is basically what they're saying. So when you look at the domains, right? Look at the breed and the species, right, of what you are working with and the individual needs of that, and use that to help you map out your individual things.
Exactly.
Right? Man, they really, really make these about as complex as they can. And I understand they have to. Right? Yeah. I understand, like, in these, like, scientific studies, it's like, we got to cover every single fucking base. Literally. Right? But goddamn.
Yeah, that was a mouthful of a paragraph.
Like, some of these, this is my problem with these studies. Sometimes it's like you read them and it's like, to most people, like, you really gotta, like, even like some of these words I'm going through, I'm like, man, like, really, if I had a ton of extra time, I'd be like Googling each of these individual words so I can really deeply understand it. But I am trying to give you my, I don't even want to say I am, scientifically the layman right now, right? Yeah. My layman's interpretation of a study like this to help everybody understand it, obviously. So, sorry if it doesn't make sense. Okay. Finally, inclusion of environmental events or conditions in domains 1 to 4 that may cause Internally or externally derived imbalances or disruptions to the animals represent areas of increased risk in which particular negative effects and welfare problems may arise. However, their mere existence does not necessarily mean that the anticipated welfare problems will arise or have arisen in the particular situation under investigation. For example, the presence of potentially damaging structures in an animal's environment presents a risk of tissue injury, but does not indicate that the animal is currently experiencing welfare compromise due to pain. Any assumption of the occurrence of negative effects may be supported by directly observed animal-based physical and psychological, clinical, and or behavioral evidence. This is equally the case for the presence of opportunities for animals to engage in rewarding behaviors. Clearly, there must be evidence, usually behavioral, that any such opportunities are actually used before their potential welfare-enhancing impacts could be considered. Only then can inferences be made about any aligned negative or positive effects. This emphasis, the general point that objective animal-based evidence must form the foundations for any inferences about welfare-relevant effects. Okay, so that one is interesting because I'll give you my layman's turn on that, right? They use the example of an animal that is compromised due to they're potentially damaging structures. So meaning like they have like a broken arm or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Or a wonky arm. You ever see somebody that like walks with a limp a lot? Things like that, right?
Yeah.
And obviously you could look at that and you could infer that there are going to be welfare problems because of this. Mm. But what they're saying is you cannot see that. You cannot say that unless you have adequately studied the species as a whole, that individual that walks with a limp because they have a bad hip that causes some pain, right? Do they still get to engage in equally positive experiences, right? That cause them to live actually a very good life that outweighs the impact of that isolated structural issue that they may have.
For sure.
Right? And you could equate this to, again, a dog in training, right? Mm-hmm. We use aversives to stop certain things. I've used an e-collar to correct my dogs, and it's been a negative experience, a very negative experience in the moment when I do that for blowing off a recall. But just because that individual situation happened, if you look at the big picture of now my dogs can run and play and have a great time and live a really incredible life because of it, we cannot say that that individual situation causes welfare impacts then.
Yeah. Seems like the 5 domains is good for balance training.
Let's see.
Oh, boy. There's a lot of pages over there, man.
Jesus Christ. I'm trying to see where we go. I'm trying to see how much of this I could weed out. Okay, so these are all references. We don't need those. Okay. All right. So let's get into this last page here.
Okay.
And then maybe we'll save this for next time.
Gotcha.
Okay. So this is going to be the rest of the 2015 model. And I don't know exactly why they're describing the 2015 model in detail. I'm assuming that's because this was the most current, obviously. I think it was 2007 was before 2015. So that was probably the biggest jump in time, right? And then they made this adjustment to it because then it jumps right into the 2020 version of it. So whatever. Summary of the grading methodology of the 2015 model. Grading systems have been incorporated into the model from its original formulation. The bases for grading negative and positive welfare impacts differ. The defining point of reference for welfare compromise is suffering and its mitigation, whereas the focus for welfare enhancement is on animals' use of opportunities to experience positive, effective engagement. The corresponding welfare impact scales also differ. A 5-tier scale, A to E, is used to grade negative welfare impacts according to the presence, intensity, and or duration of specific negative effects. Thus, grades A and B represent no and tolerably low-level impacts, respectively. Grade E represents very severe negative impacts related to experiencing effects variously manifesting at high to very high intensities and or for long to very long durations. The grades C and D represent intermediate level impacts related to their intensities and or durations. These grades therefore equate to different degrees of welfare compromise, ranging from none to very severe. Although a 5-tier scale is notionally available, this does not mean that in all cases grading can be achieved with the degree of precision implied by that number of tiers. For example, when information is limited or contradictory, it may be possible to distinguish only between no to low, moderate, and severe. From the outset, numerical grading was explicitly rejected to emphasize the importance of using scientifically informed judgment and to avoid implying unrealistically that much greater precision is achievable than is actually possible with such qualitative assessments. In contrast, a 4-tier scale, modified from that developed by Edgar and colleagues for poultry, is used to grade positive impacts where the tiers represent no, low level, medium level, and high level enhancement. Respectively, this scale has 3 integrated components: assessment of the availability of opportunities for animals to engage in self-motivating, rewarding behaviors, assessment of their actual use of those opportunities, and finally, making cautious judgments about the degrees of positive effective engagement the animals may experience and grading them accordingly. Okay, so again, my interpretation of this is they had this 5-tier scale, A to E, right? Basically representing the severity of negative impacts or positive impacts. And basically they went from that to a 4-tier scale. In contrast, the 4-tier scale modified from that developed by Edgar. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So basically they switched away from the 5 because they found situations where information is limited or contradictory. It was only, and in those situations, it was only possible to distinguish between no to low, moderate, and severe negative impacts, right? So by having it a wider range, it was really difficult to determine which one it fell on. Again, these are my interpretations of it, right? So switching to 4, you could much more easily assess no positive impact, low level positive impact, medium level, and high level. You could grade that a little bit easier on a scale, is my interpretation of that. I don't know. It seems, I don't know exactly how they came to that conclusion, but that's it, right?
All right.
And then this is the very last part. The utility of the 2015 model for assessing animal welfare. The utility of the model summarized here has been evaluated in detail elsewhere. The model's utility is based on validated scientific foundations of the physical, functional, and behavioral indices of negative effects aligned with welfare compromise and positive effects aligned with welfare enhancement. The wide range of effects identified for consideration and the configuration of the domains that was designed specifically to clarify the likely sources of those effects together enable model-based welfare assessments to be structured, systematic, comprehensive, and coherent. Moreover, 7 interacting applications of the model enable assessors are to 1. Specify key general foci for animal welfare management. 2. Highlight the foundations of specific welfare management objectives. 3. Enable monitoring of responses to specific welfare-focused remedial interventions and or maintenance activities. 4. Identify previously unrecognized features of poor and good welfare. 5. Facilitate qualitative grading of specific features of welfare compromise and or enhancement. 6. Enable both prospective and retrospective animal welfare assessments to be conducted. And 7. Provide adjunct information to support consideration of quality of life evaluations in the context of end-of-life decisions. Nevertheless, it is important not to overstate what utilization of the model can achieve. Constraints arise through the following factors. 1, different levels of confidence with which particular effects may be inferred to be present in different circumstances. 2, necessary focus only on the specific effects that can be identified. 3, differing precision with which each effect may be graded. And 4, the limits imposed by the inability to determine the relative impacts of different effects when evaluating the notional overall negative positive effective balance represented by QOL, therefore precluding the possibility of elaborating on all-inclusive QOL metric. Boy.
That was some word vomit, man.
So in a nutshell, use these 5 domains to assess your dog's quality of life.
Yes.
I think that is probably the best summary of it.
Literally.
Use these 5 domains, use them carefully and cautiously to assess your dog's overall quality of life. And I think this is important because, when we look at things like behavioral euthanasia, right? Or we look at, like an older dog that's getting ill, right? Or any of those situations, these 5 domains are going to be a way to assess, is it worth trying to keep this animal alive still? And again, I'm using dogs as the example here. Obviously, they said it's with all animals, obviously.
Yeah.
But with dogs specifically, like in a behavioral euthanasia case, right? If you're going to have to manage a dog so severely and restrict them and restrain them from things and, socially isolate them constantly and this and that, and you are not able to provide adequate positive experiences for them to make it so that they're not just existing, it is a good idea for you to behaviorally euthanize that dog then at that point, right? Their quality of life, though physically and from a health standpoint, they may be provided their needs, mentally, their negative experiences far outweigh their positive experiences. So even if you can keep everybody safe and you love your dog so much and you love when you come home from work, you could go and cuddle with them for 2 hours before you go to bed, right? If you're not providing enough positive experiences for them, it is doing a disservice to the animal, right? And then on the contrary, if you have an older dog that is ill, right, and you're trying to make the determination of at what point do I put this animal down, you have to do the same thing. Like they said in the example I used of the man with a limp, right? Just because they may be physically uncomfortable sometimes, we have to rate that discomfort on a scale of their 4-tier scale, not the 5-tier one. The 4-tier scale.
Just a 4, yeah.
Right? And then ask yourself, how much is that impacting the positive experiences that they may be currently having in their life, right? And all of this, getting back to it being subjective to the animal, a lot of this, we can't read their minds either, right? So we can assess these things and it'll give us the best educated guess, but in the end of the day, you have to be able to use your best judgment on some of these things as well.
Yeah.
Right. But that's my interpretation of these 5 domains is providing a quality of life to your animal, right? And assessing the things you may be doing or not doing to provide a higher quality of life for them. Yeah. And I think this is a good thing you could look at and you could play around with, go through the domains, right? Go through the domains and what do we got here, right? Nutrition. Ask yourself that honest question of, is my dog's nutrition good? Right? Are they healthy? Are they overweight? Are they underweight? Right? Are they being provided their needs from a nutrition standpoint? Physical environment. Am I restricting my dog too much from the things that they biologically should be doing? If so, find adjustments for that. I just did another lesson with a client. I talked about that German Shepherd. Did a lesson with another client who was a similar dog to that German Shepherd. Same deal. Under control, but just high fucking strung, man. Yeah. Same deal. Always trapped on a leash. Always stuck in a backyard that's the size of this room that we're in. Right? Yeah. They provide a good life from a nutrition standpoint, right? His health is good, right? Yeah. They do what they can for his mental state and all of that. But biologically, that dog needs to explore and run and do that, right? So we did an awesome lesson. I posted a little video of we did a whole hour-long lesson. Dude, this it's got my tongue on fire.
I know. I can imagine.
Where all we did was just an off-leash hike.
Yeah.
Right? And it was amazing. It was like the most enjoyable thing. And she's just sitting there. She's like, I want to start prioritizing more of this. And I was like, yes. Do that, right? Yeah. Because that's what the dog likes. Yeah. Right? That's what the dog needs, from a physical environment standpoint, and it's going to cause you less stress than taking him for walks and him just being like, high strung the whole time.
Yep.
So, ask yourself that question. Again, health, it sounds like health kind of is impacted by those things, obviously. Behavioral interactions, right? Mental state, like all of these things. Like start looking at these things and assess them.
Yep.
So I don't know. That's what I got for you guys. Man, imagine being the person that writes these. Holy shit. Either they are stressed all the time while they're doing it, or they're probably the most boring human on the planet. Right? One or the other.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I know. You read through some of those and I'm just like, whoa.
You know what it feels like too? Like I read a lot of books, right? And like I like to think that I'm well read and I'm a good reader, right? But like I read some of these and it feels like the sentences are never ending.
Yeah.
Like, and I know they're technically not run-on sentences because if these are like published papers, I'm sure they're not going to have run-on sentences in them, but it feels like they should be sometimes.
Yeah. And dude, I don't know. It's like, there's something about it that it takes all my willpower to not just glaze over.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, normally that's the thing is like this stuff doesn't totally pique my interest. Like I want to have somebody that knows a lot about it, like simplify and explain it to me because that's just how I learn best.
Yeah.
But like I felt myself a couple times reading it, like, and I'm reading it for the pod, obviously. Here, right. So like normally if I was reading this and I wasn't doing a podcast, my brain probably would have started glazing over. But I'd like reel myself back in a couple times and be like, okay, wait a minute. I need to then explain this after I read it. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Some of that was crazy, but I mean, overall, like you said, it's just all about what is the best welfare
quality
for your
of life.
dog. Yeah. What's the quality of life?
Providing quality of life and assessing the things you are doing to try to provide a quality of life and asking yourself if those things are truly providing a better quality of life. Case in point, in balance training.
Yep.
Right? We do a lot of things that, generally speaking, you probably can plot within negative experiences, obviously. There's plenty of positive ones also. But the bigger picture positive experiences you're able to add then will begin to outweigh, right? So, I don't know. That's my interpretation. So, I don't know. Hope you guys liked it. I mean, what an episode to do at fucking 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah. Right? You're right.
So, we're gonna wrap that up. And then, I think we're probably done with the 5 domains. I don't think we need to read the rest of it.
No,
I think we got a general gist of it. I'll skim through it on my own and make sure there's nothing else critical that I'm missing to educate you guys on, but we'll get into regular stuff next time.
Cool.
See ya.
See you guys later.